Don't forget.
Watch out.
Remember.
This sucks.
As I'm sure most of us know by now, reading is for losers. But sometimes reading can be fun, as I've seen with the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series, which also had a series of movies where the first 3 are the only ones that are actually enjoyable, and the 4th one is, not good. But as seen in recent years, quite a lot of books around this sort of demographic have been getting movie adaptations, and some have even gotten full-fledged TV shows. And while some of these shows and movies can be a lot of fun and show off what made their source material so beloved in the first place, others feel like they have no substance nor value for either fans or newcomers, and usually become forgotten as the original book would continue to be beloved by the masses for a long time to come. This unfortunately happened to Diary of a Wimpy Kid and their animated film that was released to Disney Plus this year. While the long haul might have been worse, I can at least remember how terrible it was, whereas this just feels null and void of any substance, especially with the writing. Even if Jeff Kinney wrote this film, way too many significant plot points from the books end up being cut entirely as a result of this film's woefully short runtime, and there's no real excuse for Jeff Kinney to have neglected adding them since he wrote the movie. Not to mention, the characters here are really unlikable. I get that was kind of the case in the books and movies since Greg was portrayed as a bit of a jerk, but here, the movie's attempts to make Greg more likable fall flat, not just because it sands off a lot of his flaws, but it doesn't change the fact that he's still an unlikable a-hole, and Rowley isn't all that better. Also, regarding the animation, I can tell that it wanted to do something similar to the animation in films like Captain Underpants and the Peanuts movie, but despite trying to emulate their style, the style we got here is extremely wooden, choppy, and poorly rendered, which is sad since the 2 aforementioned movies have some truly great animation. Hopefully, the Roderick Rules movie can improve from this crap, although I'm sure it'll suck too, because this was quite an embarrassment on the Wimpy Kid franchise. Also, real quick, I just wanted to mention Susan's mic quality sounds like it was recorded on a potato. So, hopefully the new Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie can fix that, or just get a new actress with a better mic. Whatever works, but yeah, I just felt like pointing that out. Now on to something live action for a change.
This sucks.
Ah, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They're quite a notable name in modern cinema, where their highs can redefine the superhero genre and deliver classics that people would still be talking about for years to come, but sometimes they make something that just flat out sucks. And Eternals is definitely one of those movies. I don't think it's as bad as Captain Marvel, since I found that to be flat out insulting, but what Eternals lacks in SJW pandering, it makes up for in being, with one exception, the most boring film of this entire year. Now, I don't mind if something wants to be slow-paced, so long as it tells an interesting story and gives a good amount of development to its characters and world, but those two things are basically non-existent here. I mean, it tries to be this ambitious and cinematic space opera filled with all sorts of plot revelations, but it ends up creating a massive amount of plot holes. Don't believe me? Let's play a little game of Spot the Plot Hole in Eternals. Ready? Go! Okay, so the Celestials have this requirement for intelligent life to be on a planet for their eggs to hatch and destroy said planet. But predators are killing intelligent life, so deviants are made to get rid of these predators. Then the deviants start to rebel and kill life too. Hang on, why would Arisha make the deviants able to rebel? Arisha made the Eternals to kill the deviants, but only informed like 2 of them about his actual plan, gave them consciences, decided to erase their memories after each planet, and made one of them deaf. What advantage does being deaf serve? I know the actress is deaf and all, but still. And plus, why have just 10 Eternals and why give them different powers? He could just have an army of them with the most powerful powers and maybe not make it possible for deviants to kill them. Plus, Arishem can just pluck them off of Earth as shown in the end of the movie, so why didn't he do that with the deviants? Hell, why did he keep populating more planets with more deviants? For some almighty being, Arishem is about as smart as a potato. I guess the Eternals are pretty dumb also, since they did jack all when Ultron tried to obliterate the world, or when Thanos used the Infinity Stones to commit genocide on half the entire universe, and even their explanation is just textbook retconning, so yeah. But of course, there's also Icarus. Icarus. He is the worst main villain in the entire MCU, and he's also one of the worst twist villains in any movie I have ever seen in my entire life. Not only does he decide to become evil out of absolutely nowhere, which isn't even accurate to the comics, but his plans are extremely confusing and somewhat self-defeating. Besides, Crow, Arishem, and maybe Druig, who is evil in the comics, were set up to be villains, so why all of a sudden did Icarus and Sprite have to become bad guys? I get that Icarus has some sort of complex moral dilemma or whatever, but compared to a villain like Thanos, who also had a moral dilemma regarding killing half the universe, he was more interesting since we got to know him throughout Infinity War and Endgame, his motives, and his backstory, and not only does Icarus barely get any of those, but none of the characters get any interesting arcs, and their acting is as stale as unbuttered toast. Wait, am I talking about the ungodly writing or the other minor flaws? I didn't know by now, but the point still stands that the writing in Eternals is an absolute disaster. Also, I guess it's worth mentioning that the direction is pretty bad. I mean, like, even if Marvel has had plenty of unknown directors doing well with the stuff they made, unlike stuff like Thor Ragnarok or the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, Chloe Zhao doesn't seem to have any idea what she's doing with these characters and just throws out whatever seems like it would work. I mean, she's had success before with stuff like Nomadland, but this is less of a solemn art house film and more of an epic superhero space opera, so it just comes across as very poorly directed all around. So, the big question is, why isn't Eternals any lower? Well, the visuals are impressive, even if the color palette is extremely dull, the cinematography is nice, the costume design is pretty good, and the score is absolutely majestic, but unfortunately, all that stuff couldn't save the fact that Eternals is still a poorly written mess that deserves the distinction of one of the worst MCU movies and one of the worst superhero movies ever made.
This sucks.
Well, here we are, number 3. Originally, this spot would have had Netflix's Yes Day, but then I realized that not only is it super obscure, but even after watching it twice, I can barely remember any of what happened in it. So yeah, off to the Shadow Realm with you, Yes Day. Anyways, I had 2 other choices for which would make this spot. Paw Patrol the movie or Thunder Force. I had a really hard time figuring out which one was worse. Hell, I almost had them tied at number 2. But since I've omitted Yes Day, which one of these will make number 3? After some thought, I've decided that the number 3 worst film of 2022 is Paw Patrol the movie. Now, yes, I know that the Paw Patrol movie is pretty well liked for whatever reason, and if you like it, that's perfectly fine. I may not agree or understand why you like it, but it's good to know that you can see something in this that I wasn't able to. Just don't get mad at me and bully me in the comments for my opinions because it's not cool or worth my time or energy. Anyways, if I can be totally honest, I don't get why this movie is so popular. For starters, I know that me saying this could sound a bit generic, but this whole movie was generic. I could easily tell what would happen in the first 5 minutes. It didn't try anything new or interesting with its story, and while I can respect it for trying to tell kids about how fear can be important through the main character Chase having PTSD, it's still a very sugar-coated portrayal of the condition, and it feels a bit too easily resolved. Hell, I'd even say that the Captain Underpants movie gave a better portrayal of PTSD. But back onto the movie itself, not only is the writing bad, but the characters are bad too. First off, the acting here is absolutely terrible. It has a lot of big-name celebrities like the kid who played young Sheldon, Tyler Perry, Jimmy Kimmel, and even Kim Kardashian, but none of them seem to care about giving memorable performances. And the characters aren't even all that memorable either, where these two constantly got under my skin, and I don't think cutting these three out would change anything about the movie. Also, the humor is incredibly juvenile and only adds onto the fact that this was specifically meant for children. The pacing is really off, and again, while cliches on their own aren't a bad thing, the way this movie uses all of its cliches are in some of the most basic and cookie-cutter ways I've seen in quite some time. And I get it, this movie's meant for kids, but just because it's meant for kids doesn't mean it shouldn't try. You wanna know why these ended up being some of my favorite movies of all time? Because they tried. Even if something's meant for kids, that doesn't mean it shouldn't try to be interesting. A kid's story that's just meant for kids isn't a good kid's story, and it sucks how more and more animated movies these days seem to be ignoring that sentiment in favor of throwing out low-rate, soulless garbage instead of stuff that can be fondly enjoyed by kids and adults for years to come. And while you can like the Paw Patrol movie all you want, to me, it's just bad. Purely and utterly bad. Please don't get mad at me in the comments. Please, just please respect my opinion. Please?
This sucks.
How Thunder Force didn't get a single Golden Raspberry nomination still baffles me to this day. It is absolutely worthless. There is nothing remotely interesting, noteworthy, or funny about it. Good God, is it unfunny. Almost every single joke is either a lame pop culture reference, a cringy product placement, or it goes on for too long and ends up overstaying its welcome. And even then, everything else about this movie is absolutely terrible. The script is insanely tired and formulaic despite its interesting concept and admittedly nice first few scenes. The characters barely have any development and aren't helped by their horrible acting. Seriously, Octavia Spencer deserves so much better than this crap. The editing is horrible, the special effects and fight scenes are lame, and so many scenes drag on for way longer than they need to, and the biggest problem of them all? This movie is boring. Seriously, even after 2 viewings, I could barely even remember what happened. Honestly, this feels like it should be number 1, since there was hardly anything that this movie had that was going in its favor. I guess Jason Bateman's performance was okay, but that's basically it. Everything else about Thunder Force is garbage. And yet, there's still one more film for me to tear apart, but first, some dishonorable mentions.
This sucks.
There were quite a few movies this year that were painfully mediocre, but weren't able to make it to being one of the absolute worst. So let's highlight some examples in alphabetical order, except for one that I'll talk about at the end. Starting off with America the Motion Picture. It's basically we're gonna be talking about the penis scene from Beavis and Butthead stretched out to feature length with how immature the humor is, in addition to the boring script. But the animation was nice, the acting was solid, and the third act was pretty fun, so I ultimately left it off the list. Black Widow. Despite Natasha being one of my favorite MCU characters, her standalone movie was honestly not very good, especially in terms of how poor the writing was, the characters not being too memorable, and the villain being pretty weak. So while the MCU has made worse, they've also made much better. Dune. I wanted to like this movie. I really wanted to like this movie. And there were some aspects that I liked about it, such as the gorgeous visuals, beautiful cinematography, solid direction, and fantastic musical score, but there was way too much exposition, the pacing was a mess, and the characters were very underdeveloped. And yes, I know that this is the first part of a franchise, but I still think there should have been some sort of substance to make us care about these characters later on or get us invested in their world, so that's ultimately why Dune made it here. Hopefully the second one will be better. The Matrix Resurrections. Maybe it's not as bad as some people say it is, since I thought the visuals were amazing, the acting was good aside from that weird accent Jada Pinkett Smith did, and the action was engaging, but the writing was awful, the cinematography and editing were just absolute garbage, and the villain was insanely stupid, so I'd easily consider it the worst Matrix film. Hopefully this spells the end for the franchise though, as I don't know what else there is to do for the franchise from this point on, but yeah, this was still a pretty weak conclusion overall. My Little Pony: A New Generation. Due to the fact that I'm a teenager and a dude, I haven't seen a whole lot of Friendship is Magic due to the fact that I'm not in the target demographic. Or at least that's what my parents would think, since they didn't allow me to watch the 2017 movie since they saw Friendship is Magic as a baby show in the same vein as Peppa Pig or Paw Patrol. But for my sort of introduction to the franchise, it existed, I guess. The writing was really clunky, there were a lot of confusing story choices, and the commentary about racism and ethnic cleansing, while well-intentioned and even bold given current political climates, was a bit too preachy, but the animation was solid and the songs were fine, so while it may not have been among this year's worst, if you want a kids film with talking animals that has a commentary on racism, you're better off with Zootopia. Peter Rabbit 2. Even with all the delays it faced due to the pandemic, we weren't missing out on a whole lot since the writing was predictable, the direction was weak, James Corden voices the main character, and the twist villain was laughably pathetic. However, the visuals were fine, and I liked the commentary on how corporate meddling can ruin beloved franchises, so I ultimately decided to leave it alone. Rumble. This was almost gonna be on the list, but even if it uses just about every sports movie cliche in the book without adding anything new to them, it was pretty well animated, the acting was good, and the concept on its own is cool, but concepts can only get you so far, and it got Rumble far enough to be close to the list, but ultimately, it's harmless. Sing 2. It's quite mediocre, but even that's impressive for Illumination standards. Of course, it's basically a carbon copy of its predecessor in terms of its script, plus there was basically no reason at all for all the characters to be animals, and Portia is one of my least favorite characters in all of media, but the dance scenes were very well choreographed, the actors all did well, Clay Calloway was a genuinely endearing character, and this movie actually got pretty dark for the standards of the Minion Company, especially with its message about grief. I still don't see Illumination being able to improve anytime soon, unless the Mario movie surprises me somehow, but we still barely know anything about it aside from the laughably pathetic cast. But even I'll admit that this is one of their better movies. Although, again, it's not for everyone because it is Illumination, but still, I guess it was fine. Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. A complete bore-fest of a film with some good concepts and acting mixed in with god-awful cinematography and editing, poor direction, and a disjointed screenplay. Hell, I almost forgot this even existed while writing this video, which only goes to show how forgettable Snake Eyes was. Venom, Let There Be Carnage. The first Venom was honestly pretty bad, so it's good that the sequel was a step up from before thanks to the great visuals and generally fun tone. However, some of the action does feel lacking due to how tame the mayhem is, the character development is pretty weak, and Venom in this movie is a whiny, selfish, ungrateful jerk who makes almost every scene with him irritating to watch. Seriously, he even gave this movie a third act breakup, and it's one of the worst ones I've seen in the ranks of the ones in The Boss Baby and Luca. However, I can at least appreciate the effort the film put into some of its other aspects, which is why I spared it some mercy, but it was admittedly very weak overall. And finally, Raya and the Last Dragon. What the hell was I thinking giving this a high 9 out of 10 at first? I mean, it's still not bad per se, as the animation is phenomenal, the acting is pretty solid, and a few of the side characters were pretty enjoyable, but the movie is very poorly written, the humor is inconsistent for the tone trying to be set up here, Sisu is completely obnoxious, and while I'm sure that the message on trust was well intentioned, it ended up being handled in an incredibly irresponsible way, as well as being excruciatingly hammered in to the point where it feels like the movie's talking down to its viewers. So even if it's gotten much worse on rewatch, it still had some aspects that barely held it together, but I just watch Encanto any day over Raya, so consider this number 11 if you would. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for.
This sucks.
Well, here we are, the final spot on this list. Originally, I thought Paw Patrol the movie or Thunder Force could have easily dominated the list, especially since I was holding out hope that a certain movie could actually be good. However, after seeing it, I was completely wrong, as not only did it end up being the worst film of this year, but it also ended up being one of the worst films I've ever seen in my life. And if you've been watching my channel for a while now, you might know what I'm talking about. But just so I can stop teasing you and get on with what I picked for number 1, well, it's Dear Evan Hansen. Honestly, it wasn't even close with this one. Dear Evan Hansen is the most vile, repulsive, emotionally manipulative piece of filth to grace the silver screen in 2021. Again, I wanted to like this movie. As someone who's had depression before, I hoped that this could have been an accurate portrayal of mental illness. But I was really naive to think that, as for someone who's been severely depressed in the past, this was basically like watching a minstrel show. But putting that aspect on the back burner for a minute, there were still a lot of problems to be found here. The direction was lifeless and dull, the cinematography was really boring and used way too much shaky cam, and since this was a musical, there were some songs here and they were garbage. I mean, the crew cut out a lot of songs that were important in the original musical story-wise, such as Anybody Got a Map and Good For You, because they cared about making Ben Platt look amazing, which is a red flag in and of itself. But Ben Platt himself is an absolutely terrible singer here. Since he's in all but one song, we constantly have to hear his voice cracks, sing whispering, sing screaming, and unnecessary opera vibrato all the time. And I mean all the time, and it doesn't even help with his singing. Plus, the other songs aren't very well done either, especially Julianne Moore just screaming her lyrics in So Big So Small, coupled with the Lil Wayne levels of auto-tune she had for some reason, which goes to show that if they were able to get Ben Platt to reprise his role as Evan, they could have easily gotten Rachel Bay Jones to reprise her role as Evan's mom. But nepotism is a powerful thing, I suppose. But not only are the songs awful, but the acting is awful as well, and the crown jewel of this movie's bad acting is, you guessed it, Ben Platt. Now, I get that Ben originally played Evan on stage. Plus, his dad produced this movie, so it makes sense that he'd want his son in it for some Hollywood nepotism. But because Ben is way too old for the role he's playing, the makeup he got only made him look older, and the weird actions he did to make him fit in with his peers once again served to make him look, well, weird. Jokes aside though, let's talk about the big thing everyone's been calling out besides Ben Platt's casting, and that is that this movie has one of the most disgusting portrayals of mental illness in any sort of media since 13 Reasons Why and the cutting scene from Brian's a Bad Father. And since Evan looks like he's in his 30s, it's impossible to sympathize with him, understand his motives, or hope for him to succeed since he's a lying, deceptive piece of crap. And plus, he more or less gets off scot-free for his actions since Good For You was cut from the film, which in the musical was the song where everyone actually tells Evan,
"Man, that is whack. No kidding, that's really messed up, dude."
Because of this, even if Evan gets somewhat of a greater comeuppance than he did in the original show, it still feels rather hollow. All he does is give a Logan Paul apology to the people he deceived, and the last scene with the character of Zoe Murphy is of her forgiving him. And Evan learns in the end not to lie, which is just the most preschool message you can teach in something like this. And that's Dear Evan Hansen, which makes Thunder Force look like Into the Spider-Verse and makes Paw Patrol the movie look like Schindler's List. It's easily the worst film of 2021, and it's easily one of the worst films I've ever seen. It's that bad. I've been going on about this movie for a while now, but that's just because I want to get the point across that Dear Evan Hansen is an abysmal piece of cinematic filth that should be viewed by no one. And the thing is, I really wanted to like this movie. Like I said, I used to suffer from really bad depression, and I've even attempted to take my own life before. So, seeing the trailers for this, I was naively suckered into thinking it'd be an accurate portrayal of depression and suicide for other people who've been in the same place I was a long time ago. Sadly though, that was not the case at all. And although I feel pretty stupid anticipating it to begin with, it still ended up being 2021's worst movie, in my opinion. I'll give it credit for one thing, though. It was an easy decision for the worst spot. And that was my list of the top 10 worst films of 2021. Yeah, these movies were really hard to sit through just so I could talk about them to a wider audience, but I feel like watching bad movies like those can also be somewhat of a good thing since it can help show us what we don't like so that we can have a greater appreciation for what we do like. And next time I'll be going over my top 10 best movies of 2021, so stay tuned for that. But with that said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!